Kyle, are you ready to do this?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Kyle Elliott. Kyle, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So you are certainly welcome. So as a queer person, male sexual assault survivor, and someone living with mental health conditions, Kyle is proud to get to use his voice and platform to help others share their stories, get help, and achieve recovery. Kyle manages his anxiety, his OCD, and PTSD with therapy, medication, and persistent self care. Kyle is a career and life coach, professional speaker, and avid writer who finds solidarity and relief in sharing his story. And he wants you to know that help is available and recovery is possible. Awesome. All right. Before we get going, Kyle, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I'm originally from Santa Barbara, California, and I now, as of 2 years ago, am back here. My partner and I are Disneyland pass holders, and we wanted to live closer to Disneyland. But I do not like the heat, and my partner loves the heat. So we
Oh boy.
compromised on Santa Barbara because it's halfway between Disneyland and my parents live in wine country, Paso Robles. So it was a nice little compromise and
Could
ended
be
up in my
worse.
hometown. Yes, there are a lot worse places to live
Could
than
be worse.
beautiful Santa Barbara.
All right. So let's dive in here. How the heck did you get here? How the heck are we talking? Why are we talking today?
Yeah, I think the point that got me here, at least one of the points, was graduate school. I was sexually assaulted in graduate school, and I already had several mental health conditions at the point. And that sexual assault resulted in PTSD. And how I like describing my symptoms of PTSD is kind of like deja vu that doesn't end.
Mm,
So if you imagine deja vu and say, ugh, it feels like that was just kind of a weird experience. I was out of it for a few seconds. I feel like I've been here. Well, I had panic attacks that felt like deja vu for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours.
mm,
And that lasted for several months. And when I was in that dark, scary place of not knowing what was going on, I finally said, oh, what if I write about this and share my story? I had found a lot of solidarity previously with my anxiety and OCD writing. So I said, oh, what if I write about this? And I
hmm
just started slowly. I would post on social media, oh, self care Sunday, or oh, going to my therapist today. And then over time, I started sharing more and more and found so much relief and
hmm
solidarity in sharing my story and then community as well. And I was blown away by how sharing my story was pivotal to my recovery. And I think that's why we're here today, that journey and
hmm
helping other people realize, oh, maybe sharing your story might be helpful too. I never encourage people to do it before they're ready and recognizing there can be both benefits and costs. But for me, it's been really helpful. And that's why I love showing up on podcasts like this.
So you said before the sexual assault, you were dealing with some mental health issues,
Mm-hmm.
concerns. Were those, or was that something that you were getting help for?
Yeah, so I was getting help for it. I went to therapy, I was on
Okay.
medication.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And previously to this, I experienced migraines, part of my story too. I experienced migraines for about 5 years, went to literally countless doctors, probably a few hundred visits, and no one could figure out these migraines. And then
hmm
finally, a doctor said, oh, have you seen a psychiatrist? Went to a psychiatrist. I was in college, and within literally 30 seconds of our appointment, she said, oh, anxiety, OCD, let's try treating those. And as soon as we started treating those, I saw relief. And then
And
five
was
years
that
later,
treatment, excuse me, was that treatment via therapy and medication or?
yes,
Okay.
yeah, and a lot of self care as well.
Okay.
I think of it kind of those are my three in the pie: therapy, self care, and medication. That's my kind of three slices of the pie.
The trifecta,
Exactly.
the
Um,
self-care trifecta.
yeah, and I like it too because then if one of them's not working, I still have two-thirds of a pie, which is more than enough.
Right.
Um, and I was doing well managing those, and then the sexual assault came along and kind of threw everything out of whack. And I was like, oh gosh, this is difficult and challenging. And it took quite a few months before I found the power of storytelling
hmm
and had the courage to share. But once I did,
Let me ask about that. So,
yeah.
um, yes, obviously, people know that sexual assault happens with men as well, although it's not as common, but
Mhm.
it does happen. When that happened, how did you talk about it with people? Did you not talk about it with people? What was your reaction?
Yeah, I attempted to talk about it even immediately when I was sexually assaulted. I called 911 after it happened, and I was not believed by the firefighters. I was investigated. The person who assaulted me ended up doing a restraining order against me.
Nice.
They hired a defense attorney, and the defense attorney suggested that. So there was a lot of not being believed throughout this, which likely contributed to the trauma. If I had this negative experience, and then the police are questioning me and asking if I'm the perpetrator. The firefighters didn't believe me. I went to the hospital and they said, "What would you like us to do?
Oh my God.
Would you like us to discharge you?" So a lot of disbelief at the beginning. And I think that's why I didn't share my story sooner. But when I shared with my parents, with friends, I found a lot of relief just sharing one on one. And I've always loved writing. So I said, "Oh, what if I shared this more broadly?
And
What if I
what did you do specifically when you shared it? What did you say?
It started slow. It started really slow. So I just kind of put my toe in the water and said, okay, I'm going to therapy today, and had a great session. Or don't forget to focus on your mental health. So I wasn't disclosing everything. I didn't just put out right away that I was a male sexual assault survivor or anything like
Mhm.
that. There were just baby steps at first, and that helped me get used to it. And then I saw a lot of relief come in. People said, "Oh, I went to therapy too." And sometimes these were public comments. A lot of time they were private comments, because this was 2016. So still there's stigma now, but even more stigma back then.
Right.
And there's a lot of solidarity. There was a lot of people reaching out and sharing their own experiences. And then over time, I would share a little bit more, and then finally did share about my sexual assault and quote unquote came out as
Hmm.
a assault survivor. I published an article around it, and there's just so much relief in putting it out there and not having to hide this aspect of myself.
So you were in college at the time,
Yes, I was in graduate school.
graduate school rather. To what degree did this derail your journey in graduate school, your studies?
Yeah. I ended up graduating actually a semester early. So I one of the ways I coped, probably not the healthiest, was with overworking. But initially, it really was traumatic. I was
Hmm.
literally served papers from the police, the restraining order in class. So I was in the middle of class, and police came in and gave me papers. And I think this perpetrator who did it was strategic. Okay, let's try and fluster him.
Right.
Let's serve him papers within 24 hours. Let's bring him to court. All of this. So it was very traumatic. And these panic attacks were difficult. I'd have panic attacks. I would call my parents multiple times a day and say, "Oh, have I told you I've been sexually assaulted?" And they'd say, "Yeah, we've had this conversation 100 times." And my parents were very supportive, which I'm thankful for. But it was me continually forgetting things. Recently, I was trying to find a paper I wrote back then, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't even know I had this professor." I couldn't remember the professor. So it really impacted my memory at the time. And really, probably for a good semester or two, or we had the quarter system, a good quarter or two really just put me in a fog, is the best way to describe it. Just feeling disconnected from everything, and that
Hmm.
deja vu again that lasted for hours.
So what were you studying in graduate school?
Yeah, I was doing a master's in public administration at the time. I wanted to run a hospital or a nonprofit, and that was my big goal. And I was working in the nonprofit space as well.
So how did things unfold for you professionally and personally?
Professionally, my career still did well. I was a workaholic previous to this, and then just dove in deeper. And I'm a career coach now, so I help people recognize when they're in toxic work. And I was definitely looking back at toxic work environment. I remember telling my boss, I didn't say why, but I said, "Oh, I was in the ER." And she responded, "Oh, I hope you're okay. Please make sure you send these things to me." And she pivoted to work, and I said, "Okay, great." She said, "What meetings do you have? Make sure you send these things." And it shifted so quick to work, not even like, "Are you okay? What's going on? Do you need the day off?" It was just like immediately pivoted back to work. Thankfully, I still did well at work because of that workaholism, but I don't
Right.
remember a
Right.
lot of my time back then as well, which was really unfortunate because graduate school, the parts I do remember were really exciting. I did a lot of amazing work, had some great classes, and I just don't remember
It
a lot of
sounds
pieces
it
of it.
it sounds, Kyle, that it's just so crazy the way people responded to. I mean, I guess it's not surprising, but it's still
Yeah.
nonetheless, it's so crazy and sad that
Mm-hmm.
the way people, you were treated as the perpetrator, you were the victim. Let's
Mm-hmm.
investigate what is how did what's your take home from that experience?
It it makes sense to me why people don't share their stories. And I'm a very vocal person. I'm very assertive. I had already had mental health conditions, so I knew how to advocate for myself. In my undergrad, my major was health education and public health. So I was very well versed in the system and what to do.
Hmm.
I had worked with a lot of survivors before. So I worked in residential life at the time. So I'd had people come to me who literally were survivors, and I would walk them through the process. And then to be on the other side and say, oh my gosh, I'm literally following the script of what society tells us to do. Report it, go to the
Hmm.
police, write your story down, tell them. All of this I was following and not being believed was really scary. And just another reason why I share my story to say, here's what's going on, here's where there's gaps and how we can fix them. Because I have that strength and that privilege to share my story. So I want to hope this doesn't happen to other people.
Where you seem like a super smart guy, very proactive.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that come from?
My parents. I would definitely say I'm so thankful I had my parents through this. I would be able to call them and text them. My dad flew up. They were in California. I was living in Seattle, and my dad flew up to go to court with me. Um, so I had very supportive parents, and they've always been supportive. I think that's something not a lot of people have who are dealing with mental health challenges
Hmm.
or conditions, and that's something I've had. So they've ingrain that supportiveness in me and also that work ethic to keep going and fighting through it because it takes a lot of strength and resiliency to not just fight through mental health conditions and persevere, but also through a sexual assault. And not just any sexual assault, but one where you're not being believed, where you then have PTSD after. There was a lot of things building up against me, and my parents taught me that resilience and strength.
At what point did you say to yourself, okay, I want to get into coaching, I want to get into career coaching specifically? How did that evolve for you?
Yeah, that happened 100% by accident. And a lot of it was in grad school at the same time. I was looking for outlets to release this energy. I literally started on Fiverr, so the online marketplace where you charge $5 for a gig, you can get a logo. I reviewed a resume for $5, or I would edit people's essays for $5 a page. And then this kept growing and growing and growing. So I think I started my sophomore year of college. And then by grad school, I think it was like $40 a resume. Because every time I had a wait list, my dad said, double your prices. So it was five, then 10, then 20, 30. He's my genius marketer um, who's horrible at technology. And I'm a tech career coach. So I always run things by him. But it was his idea to just keep doubling it. And now I work with some of Silicon Valley's top talent. But it really grew through grad school when I was dealing through all of this. And I've actually never recognized that until our podcast. But I think it was an outlet. Like I can't control everything going on right now, but at least I can focus on this side hustle. It was a side hustle at the time, and I can focus on that and dedicate my energy to this.
So is your career coaching business and your experience as a queer person, sexual assault survivor, are they two distinct things, two separate things in your professional life?
No, I talk about it a lot. I share my story a lot, and I'm very open about my experiences and share about being sexually assaulted, about my mental health conditions, about being queer. So I share a lot about it. I'm very active on LinkedIn and other
Hmm.
platforms, but I write a lot about it. And I find with clients, they say, "Ooh, I can relate to that." And even if they don't have the same identity or lived experiences, they say, "Ooh, I can still relate and I want to work with you." Maybe you've dealt with similar experiences. And I don't say, here's what I did, here's what you should do, but I say, ooh, I've been there. Now let's find what
Hmm.
works for you based on your situation. So we can say we've been down similar paths, and it's so helpful having someone that's been there.
you also seem, aside from me seeming really being really smart, but you also seem super uh positive.
Mhm.
How do you keep that up? And not that you're some robot,
Yeah.
but in terms of our listeners,
Hmm.
what do you do to keep
Yeah.
focused and
Yeah.
positive?
I think going back to that pie, and I love thinking of it as a pie because sometimes a slice falls off. You're like, oh, so my pie, it has that therapy, it has that medication, and it has that self care. And sometimes therapy, okay, I can't go to therapy this week. Or, oh, that wasn't as helpful as I want it to be. Or, oh, I've tried a lot of medications. And sometimes one day I'm like, this isn't working and I need something new. Or with self care, it's like, oh, I didn't get my self care today or this week. And having all three of those has been really helpful. So then, if one of kind of, I think you said the legs of the stool or whatever falls off, you still have the other two. And
Mm-hmm.
within that self care, I have a lot of community as well. I have my parents, as I've mentioned. I have friends who have been super supportive through this. And then the online community I've built, and from that, people I've met in person who I've been able to share my story and say, hey, we have similar experiences. This is really helpful.
So let me just remind everyone, I'm speaking with Kyle Elliott. His website is caffeinatedkyle.com. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. So where does that come from? I got to ask.
Yes, I love coffee. That was the initial place of where it comes from. And I say, oh, okay, somewhere in my brand needs to be coffee or caffeinated or espresso. And I was brainstorming with one of my staff when I still had my full-time job. And we're like, oh, caffeinated Kyle. I'm caffeinated. I caffeinate people's careers. I caffeinate their stories. This was pre-pandemic. So I encourage people to meet for coffees and network to find jobs. So just a little bit of all of that.
What do you feel makes you such a good slash effective coach?
My superpower, I find, is being able to ask the questions that get to people's answers. So people come to me really stuck. That's what I'm known for. People who are really stuck. So, I can't decide what job I want. I can't decide what company to go to. I don't know how to ask for a raise. I don't know what makes me fabulous. And I know how to ask the right question.
Can you give me?
Oftentimes,
I don't want to interrupt you here, but give me. Can you get specific? You don't have to mention names, obviously,
yeah,
but
yeah.
go.
Get specific in regard to like the types of clients or the
Yeah,
challenges.
someone came to me last month, or et cetera.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Someone came to me and they're like, "Oh, I'm a senior manager at Amazon, but I want to be a director or VP at Meta. How do I make that transition happen?" Or, "Oh, I've been in the nonprofit space my whole life as an executive, and I'm kind of burnt out and I want to make more money. How do I move to tech?" So usually when I work with people, it's not like I'm a finance director at this bank. I want to be a finance director at this bank. No problem with that, but that's just not my zone of genius. Mine is when there's some stuckness or transition or change and they need help connecting the dots.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I have the answer. Sometimes I do have the answer and I'll say it. But typically, I find my clients have the answers and I can ask the right question that gets them unstuck to say, okay, what sets you apart from everyone who's applying to tech who has tech experience? Why should they hire a nonprofit COO?
Mm-hmm.
And then clients say, I don't know. And I have one single rule when people are on the screen with me, when they do homework, is they're not allowed to say, I don't know. I don't allow that word when we're working together. They're allowed to say anything else, but not, I don't know. And I think of it like an iceberg, all the amazing answers to their questions underneath the word, I don't know, or underneath the surface. And we start finding the answers together. And sometimes it takes a few days or weeks or months and sweating and crying and screaming or whatever, but we find all those answers underneath it.
What's next for you in terms of your personal journey, in terms of your personal healing journey? I mean, it to me, it's very inspiring to talk to you and hear you be. I mean, you're very open about sharing your story, about the fact that you have therapy, you know have medication and self-care and so forth. Is this a Where are you on your quote unquote healing journey?
Yeah. I feel like it's a lifelong journey. So I'm going to continue to work on these. If I remove one of these slices of the pie, or I remove one of the legs of the stool, if we want to call it that, it's going to fall over. So it's a continual
Mhm.
journey and optimizing, because sometimes things work and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I don't really find relief in this anymore. This isn't helpful anymore. I need to try something different. We kind of mentioned Disneyland earlier. I'm a pass holder with my partner, and we're like, oh, going every 2 weeks. We're not finding relief in this as much, or it's not as fun. Maybe we need to go every month. So I find like I'm in recovery, and recovery is a verb, not a noun. So I have to keep doing it and saying, how does this look different? So for me right now, it's finding a hobby. My hobby for the last 3 years was a doctorate, because I love learning, I love writing, I love researching. So now it's okay, what's that next hobby that's going to support my self care, support my love of learning, support my love of storytelling and writing and mental health and coaching? So that's kind of what's next for me. I've been trying to find that next hobby that supports all of this.
As we kind of get ready to close down here, obviously a lot of people who are listening to this are therapists, coaches, and survivors, and any combination thereof. For people who are listening and who are maybe not as comfortable with quote unquote sharing their story, writing it down on social media, whatever. And granted, you said that's not for everyone, but what
Mm-hmm.
what do you say to people who have experienced trauma or maybe even sexual assault and don't even know where to start to begin that process?
Yeah. And I appreciate you highlighting that. I said it's not right for everyone. I never encourage people to do it before they're ready. Something to be thinking about is, can you share your story in some manner and reflect on what that means? And that doesn't always have to be on public
Right.
platforms. It could be okay. Would it be helpful to share it in your journal with yourself? Would it be helpful sharing with a therapist that you haven't shared before, or maybe a doctor? What does it look like for you to share your story? If that's something from today I've shared, me sharing my story has been helpful for me. For you, would it be helpful to share your story as well? And when I say share, I think of it really broadly. So for you to just think, what might that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And how you might do so. So is it a journal, like I said, a therapist, a doctor, to God, if that's what you practice, or spirits, and recognize that there could be some solidarity in there for you and see if that helps.
So say more about the solidarity. Why do you feel sharing it in any manner is helpful?
Yeah, so I actually wrote my doctoral dissertation on mental health storytelling and sharing our stories. And there's
Okay.
research, including my own now, that says there's relief in sharing our story. So people experience less self stigma, people experience relief in sharing it. And it depends on your identity and a whole host of factors what that relief
Mm-hmm.
looks like. But people actually find relief in sharing their stories. And specifically, there's relief when people share it verbally with other people versus other forms. So not that other forms are less positive, but there's a lot of relief people find literally when they share their stories. And it's backed by research that sharing our stories can do good for our mental health.
That's so interesting. I mean, I think intuitively uh, we know that, or I don't know. I kind of feel I knew that, but I went through something, have been going through something recently that I did share on social media, and I got a lot of support back, and it was really friggin' helpful.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like we're all going through something.
Yeah. And when you think of other parts of your life, not even mental health, just, oh, if you go to Starbucks and they messed up your order or something, just sharing that with someone can feel good, whether it's on social media or with a friend or a text or a post. You're like, oh, that feels good. So it makes sense. Other parts of our life, it feels good. And if we look at human existence, I'm not a history buff, but I had to look into it for my dissertation. We look back at human existence.
Hmm.
We've shared stories for as long as we can see back in research and found some benefit in it. And that's why we keep doing it for centuries and centuries.
What's your mission? I mean, you have this energy about you, this charge about you. What are you doing? What is your mission?
I love people, love helping people find jobs. And then beyond that, though, really helping people figure out what's fabulous about them and then sharing it with the world. And I primarily work with senior managers and executives in tech, and they're the most fabulous, unique people. I think everyone's fabulous and unique, but they're just unique in certain ways and fabulous in certain ways. And it's exciting once they unlock that and
Right.
then have the confidence and courage to share it with people and say, oh, this is unique about me. Let me share it. And that's just so exciting to see people do and then achieve things they never imagined possible, whether it was working less, spending more time with their kids, achieving some salary, being the only person of color in the C-suite, whatever it is that they want to achieve, it's super possible to see that. And I find it's often on the other side of identifying and owning what's unique about them.
Awesome. Kyle, I want to thank you so much for being here. I'd love to have you back at a later
Absolutely.
date to bask in your energy and your positivity. I mean that sincerely. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
All right.